Laughter echoed through the small dorm room, filling every corner with an air of youthful excitement. Zara sat on the bed, applying a final stroke of lip gloss, while her two roommates, Amaka and Bimp, struggled to zip up their tight dresses in front of the mirror. "Zara, are you sure about this dress?" Amaka twirled, adjusting the short red gown hugging her curves. "I don't want Chuka thinking I'm too available." "Abeg, you're already too available," Bimp teased, throwing a pillow at her. "We all know you'll be all over him the moment we enter the club." Zara laughed, shaking her head. "You look good, Jair. Let's just go and have fun." The girls had been looking forward to this night all week. Mid-semester stress had drained them, and a Friday night out at one of the most expensive clubs in town felt like the perfect escape. Zara, however, was not just excited about the party, she was excited about Anthony. Anthony had been the topic of secret conversations between her and Bimp for weeks now. He was a 60-year-old businessman, wealthy, powerful, and utterly captivating. Zara had met him at a restaurant when she went out with some older friends, and since then, he had pursued her with a kind of attention that no boy her age had ever given. "Are you sure your sugar daddy will be there?" Bimp whispered as they stepped out of the hostel, their heels clicking on the pavement. "First of all," Zara rolled her eyes, "he's not my sugar daddy. He's my boyfriend." Bimp snorted. "Boyfriend that's old enough to be your grandfather?" Zara ignored her, but deep down, a tiny part of her wondered if Bimp had a point. Anthony was 40 years older than her. But did age really matter when he made her feel so special? By the time they reached the club, the music was already pulsing through the walls, shaking the air around them. The lights inside flickered in wild patterns, and the scent of expensive perfume and alcohol filled Zara's lungs. And then she saw him. Anthony stood near the VIP section, dressed in a crisp navy blue suit, his salt and pepper hair neatly combed back. He looked so composed, so different from the noisy young men crowding the dance floor. His deep brown eyes locked onto hers, and he smiled. Zara felt a rush of something electric inside her chest. "You came," she said, breathless, as she approached him. "Did you think I'd miss the chance to see you?" His voice was smooth, deep, and reassuring. He took her hand and led her to a private booth, away from the chaos of the club. Zara's heart pounded as he poured her a glass of wine. She knew what everyone thought, that she was just another young girl chasing an older man's wealth. But they didn't see how he looked at her, how he made her feel. As the night deepened, she leaned into him, letting herself believe that maybe, just maybe, this could be real love. But love has a way of turning into something else. And Zara had no idea that this night would be the beginning of something tragic. Anthony sat in his spacious office, a cigar resting between his fingers as he scanned the documents before him. Past year had been good for business, but not as good for his personal life. His wife, Helen, had been complaining about finances lately, which irritated him. He had worked too hard for too long to listen to a woman nag him about money. Besides, he had other priorities now. Zara. His phone buzzed on the table, and he smiled as her name appeared on the screen. "Baby calling." He picked up immediately. "My love." "Bethany, I need money." Zara's voice was sweet but firm. "My rent is due next week, and I don't want any stress." Bethany leaned back in his chair. "How much?" 500,000 should cover it." 500,000? He chuckled. "Zara, that's a lot for rent. I just gave you money last week." "Baby, please." She stretched out the word in that playful way that made him weak. "It's a self-contained apartment, you know I can't keep living in the dorms. Too noisy. You want me to focus on my studies, right?" Anthony exhaled. He had never been able to say no to her. "All right, I'll send it." "Thank you, baby." Her giggle was like music. "I'll come and see you tonight." Anthony smiled, feeling that familiar rush of excitement. It had been years since anyone had made him feel this important. Back at home, Helen sat at the dining table with their son Emmanuel, eating a simple meal of rice and palm oil stew. The table was smaller now. She had been forced to sell the old one when things started getting tight. Mom, I need school fees, Emmanuel muttered, pushing the food around his plate. Helen sighed. Your father hasn't sent any money yet. Emmanuel scoffed. What does he even do with his money? His business is booming, but we're here eating plain rice every night. Helen clenched her fists. She knew exactly where the money was going, to that little university girl Anthony had been fooling around with. Helen had seen the signs: late nights, secretive phone calls, and most painfully, the decline in their finances. Mom, you need to talk to him. Helen took a deep breath. She had been patient for too long. Tonight, she would demand answers. Zara's life had changed drastically in the past year. Her new apartment was in a highbrow area of the city, a sharp contrast from the cramped dorm room she used to share. She no longer boarded Danfo's or Okada's. Anthony had gotten her a small Mercedes. She dressed in designer clothes, carried luxury bags, and ate at expensive restaurants. And it was all because of Anthony. Zara, you're too lucky, Bimp said, lying on her couch, scrolling through Instagram. I mean, look at your life now. A whole Mercedes? Do you even remember the last time you entered a Kiki? Zara smirked. That's why I tell you to stop suffering with these broke boys. Find yourself a real man. Abeg, where did you put his wife? You think she doesn't know? Zara rolled her eyes. That woman should rest. Anthony loves me, not her. But he still sleeps in her house, Amaka added, raising an eyebrow. Zara frowned. That part annoyed her. She wanted him all to herself. That night, she planned to change that. Anthony was already in her apartment when Zara arrived. He sat on the couch, sipping a glass of whiskey, looking tired. Hey, baby. She leaned down and kissed him. Hey, my love. He pulled her onto his lap, but she gently pushed him away. Anthony, I need to ask you something. He raised an eyebrow. Go on. When are you leaving your wife? Anthony sighed. Zara, we've talked about this. No, you keep avoiding it. She crossed her arms. I'm not just some girl you spoil with gifts. I love you. I want to be with you properly. Anthony rubbed his temples. Zara, I love you too. But I have a family. Emmanuel is still in school. And Helen. She has been with me for over 30 years. Zara scoffed. 30 years of what? Nagging? You said you're tired of her. That's different. Marriage is complicated. Zara stood up, her voice rising. No, it's not. You're choosing her over me after everything I've done for you. Everything you've done? Anthony laughed bitterly. Zara, I pay for your entire life. The car, the apartment, your tuition. So that's all I am to you? A bill? Anthony sighed, pulling her close. No, baby. But you have to understand. I don't have to understand anything, she snapped, stepping back. If you really love me, you'll prove it. Anthony stared at her for a long moment, feeling trapped. Give me time, he muttered. Zara didn't respond. She simply walked into the bedroom, leaving him there, knowing she had planted the seed of doubt. Soon, she thought, he would have no choice but to choose. And that choice would change everything. Helen sat in the living room, staring at the wall clock. It was past midnight and Anthony still hadn't come home. Again. She wasn't surprised. The man she married had changed. The man who once shared his dreams with her, who had built their business from the ground up with her support, was now nothing more than a stranger. The front door creaked open. Helen's heart jumped, but she steadied herself. She had promised herself that tonight she would demand answers. Anthony walked in, smelling of whiskey and expensive cologne. His shirt was slightly unbuttoned, his tie loosened. He didn't even look at her as he walked past. Anthony, we need to talk, Helen said firmly. He sighed, rubbing his temples. Not now, Helen. Not now, when? She snapped. You leave the house at odd hours, you don't send money for your son's fees, and you don't even acknowledge us anymore. Anthony turned to her, his expression cold. I've had a long day. I don't need this. Helen felt her anger boil. You don't need this? You don't need your family? Anthony exhaled and ran a hand through his hair. Helen, let's not do this. Things have changed. Because of her, right? Helen's voice cracked. That girl. That little university girl. Anthony didn't respond. He simply walked to the cabinet and poured himself a drink. Helen stepped closer. You're throwing us away for her? He sipped his drink, then placed the glass down. Helen, I want a divorce. Silence. For a moment, it felt like the room had shrunk, like the walls were closing in on her. You what? She whispered. I've made up my mind. I want to move on. Helen staggered back. Move on? After 30 years? After everything we built together? I'll make arrangements, Anthony interrupted, his voice detached. I'll give you something to manage. But I can't do this anymore, Helen's chest tightened. What about Emmanuel? Your son? Anthony sighed. He's a grown man. I'll figure it out. Helen felt the air leave her lungs. You're heartless. Anthony downed his drink and turned to leave. You'll receive the papers soon. And just like that, he walked upstairs, leaving her standing there, broken. 2 weeks later, Helen and Emmanuel stood outside their house, their belongings scattered around them. The security men had been ruthless, tossing everything onto the street. Neighbors whispered from their gates, shaking their heads. Mom, what do we do now? Emmanuel asked, his voice heavy with anger and shame. Helen swallowed hard, trying to hold back tears. We survive. But in that moment, she had never felt more abandoned. Zara walked into the grand mansion with a wide smile. She had been here before, but this time it was different. This was her home now. Anthony had gone all out, renovations, new furniture, everything she had ever wanted. She walked around the house, running her fingers along the polished walls. Do you like it? Anthony asked, watching her. She turned and grinned. I love it, baby. Anthony pulled her into his arms. It's all yours. Zara laughed, leaning into him. She had won. She was no longer the secret. She was the wife. But she had no idea that victories like this come with consequences. The first 6 months of Zara's marriage to Anthony felt like a dream. She had everything: luxury cars, designer clothes, vacations to Dubai and Paris, and an endless stream of expensive gifts. Anthony was obsessed with her, spoiling her with everything she wanted. He barely went to work anymore. His company was running, but without his full attention. His mornings were spent lounging in bed with Zara, afternoons taking her shopping, and nights drinking fine wine with her. Baby, I saw this diamond bracelet at the store today, Zara said one evening, scrolling through her phone. Anthony, sitting beside her on the couch, smirked. How much is it? She turned to him with a playful pout. Just 3 million naira. Anthony chuckled. Is that all? Consider it done. Zara giggled and climbed onto his lap, kissing his cheek. You're the best. I just want you to be happy, he murmured, stroking her hair. And she was. But happiness was a fleeting thing. Zara's social life exploded. With Anthony's money, she became the star of every party: clubbing, beach getaways, weekend trips with her friends. One Friday night, at a private pool party hosted by her best friend Bimp, Zara met David. He was nothing like Anthony. Young, fit, and full of life. He had an effortless charm that made girls throw themselves at him. But that night, his eyes were on Zara. You don't belong with a man like that, David said, standing close to her by the poolside, a drink in his hand. Zara arched an eyebrow. Oh? And what kind of man do I belong with? David smirked. A man who can match your energy. Zara laughed. Anthony gives me everything I want. But does he give you excitement? She hesitated. David leaned in. Let me take you out. No fancy restaurants. Just you and me. Something real. Zara felt a dangerous thrill in her chest. Give me your number, she whispered. And just like that, Zara started living a double life. Anthony remained blinded by his love for Zara. One evening, he set up a romantic dinner in their garden, candles flickering in the warm night breeze. He had planned everything: her favorite meal, a violinist playing in the background, a new diamond necklace waiting as a surprise. But Zara was on her phone, smiling at a text from David. Baby, put your phone down, Anthony said gently, reaching for her hand. Zara forced a smile and tucked the phone away. Sorry, love. What were you saying? Anthony shook his head with a soft chuckle. I was saying that I want to take you to the Maldives next month. Just us, no distractions. Zara's heart sank. That would mean being away from David for too long. That sounds amazing, she lied. Anthony lifted his glass. To us. Zara clinked her glass against his and smiled. But deep down, she was already thinking of an excuse to slip away to see David. She had everything. Yet she wanted more. And soon that hunger would lead to disaster. Zara sat across from David in a dimly lit restaurant, her fingers playing with the stem of her wine glass. He had chosen this place, hidden, private, away from the world where no one would recognize her as Mrs. Anthony Okafor. David leaned forward, his charming smile never fading. Do you love me? Zara's heart skipped. She did. More than she had ever thought possible. More than she had ever loved Anthony. With David, she felt young, free, desired. You know I do, she whispered. David reached across the table, taking her hand in his. Then trust me, baby. I just want to take care of you. Zara sighed, biting her lip. I already have everything, David. What more do I need? David chuckled, shaking his head. You don't get it, do you? That old man, he owns everything. The house, the cars, the money in your account. What happens if one day he gets tired of you? What if he finds a younger girl just like he left his wife for you? Zara stiffened. The thought had never crossed her mind. Anthony was obsessed with her, but he had been obsessed with his wife once too. David leaned in closer. You need security, baby. You need control. Zara swallowed. What are you saying? David smirked, his voice low and persuasive. I'm saying, you're his wife. You have access to everything. Bank accounts. Property documents. With a few signatures, you can make sure everything is in your name. Zara hesitated. David reached for her chin, tilting her face up to meet his gaze. Do you trust me? She nodded slowly. Then let me help you. Started small. A few gifts for David, a car, an apartment, cash deposits that Anthony never noticed because he never checked his accounts. He trusted Zara completely. You don't need to ask me for money, he had once told her. You're my wife. What's mine is yours. That was his mistake. Soon, David introduced her to a lawyer, a shady man who knew how to alter documents. They started shifting assets. A property here, a bank account there. Zara didn't think too much about it. She just wanted to make David happy. One night, as they lay in bed together, David stroked her hair. Baby, you're doing the right thing. This is our future. Zara smiled sleepily. I just don't want Anthony to find out. David kissed her forehead. He won't. And even if he does, it'll be too late. One morning, Anthony sat in his study, flipping through financial reports. Something felt off. He picked up his phone and called his lawyer. Check my accounts. All of them. That was the beginning of the end. Anthony sat in his office, gripping the edge of his desk as his best friend, Charles, paced the room. The air was thick with tension. You're telling me your accounts are empty? Charles asked, his voice laced with disbelief. Anthony exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples. Not empty, but nearly. Properties, shares, even my personal savings, Zara has transferred them. Charles slammed his palm against the desk. And you didn't notice? Jesus, Anthony. Anthony shook his head, a bitter smile forming on his lips. I trusted her. I loved her. Charles scoffed. Love? Love doesn't make a woman steal from you and fund another man's lifestyle. You've been played, my friend. Anthony's jaw tightened. The thought of Zara in another man's arms made his blood boil. The realization that she had betrayed him after everything he had done for her felt like a dagger to his chest. I need to hear it from her, he muttered. Charles frowned. What are you going to do? Anthony straightened. I'll ask her. Tonight during dinner. Charles hesitated. Anthony, be careful. A woman like that. She's dangerous. Anthony waved him off. She wouldn't dare harm me. But he was wrong. That evening, Zara set the dining table with an eerie calmness. The candles flickered softly, casting long shadows across the room. She had prepared Anthony's favorite meal, spicy jollof rice, grilled fish, and a chilled glass of red wine. And in the food, she had mixed poison. Anthony walked in, his face unreadable. Zara flashed him a smile, but he didn't return it. Dinner's ready, love, she said, pouring his wine. Anthony sat down, studying her. She looked radiant, untouched by guilt. For a few minutes, they ate in silence. Then, he set his spoon down and folded his arms. Why? Zara blinked. Why what? Anthony's voice was calm, but his eyes burned with pain. Why did you betray me? Zara swallowed, placing her fork down. I don't know what you're talking about. Anthony let out a dry chuckle. Don't play dumb, Zara. I know about the accounts, the properties, the money. I know about David. Zara's breath hitched, but she quickly recovered, leaning back in her chair. So? What now? Anthony shook his head, disbelief clouding his face. I gave you everything. My time, my love, my wealth. I left my wife and son for you. His voice broke. Was I never enough? Zara tilted her head, her expression turning cold. You were useful. Anthony felt the air leave his lungs. Zara picked up her wine glass, swirling the liquid. But love? She let out a soft laugh. Love was never part of the deal, Anthony. Anthony opened his mouth to speak, but suddenly a sharp pain shot through his stomach. He clutched his chest, his vision blurring. Zara stood, watching as he gasped for air, his body convulsing. What? Anthony choked, his hands trembling. Zara leaned down, whispering, I couldn't let you take everything back, baby. Anthony's world darkened as he collapsed onto the table. His last thought was not of anger, but of regret. He had destroyed his family for this woman. And now she had destroyed him. Zara stood in front of the large mirror in her bedroom, wearing nothing but a silk robe. The house, Anthony's house, was eerily silent. For the first time in weeks, she felt uneasy. Anthony was dead. She had gotten away with it. But why did she feel like something was coming? Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was David. Come over. She smirked and grabbed her car keys. Her life was just beginning. David lived in a penthouse apartment, bought with Anthony's money. When Zara arrived, she found him pouring champagne into 2 glasses, grinning like a king who had conquered a kingdom. To us, he said, handing her a glass. Zara smiled, sipping slowly. To us. David leaned against the counter, watching her. So, what's next, my love? Zara sighed dramatically. We lay low for a while. Police said Anthony died of food poisoning, so I'm not a suspect. His assets are all in my name now. She chuckled. I own everything. David smirked. We own everything, you mean? Zara hesitated for a second, but forced another smile. Of course, baby. David walked over and ran a finger down her arm. You're so smart, Zara. So beautiful. Zara giggled, wrapping her arms around his neck. You like that, don't you? David kissed her lips. I love it. But what he loved more was control. A week passed. Then another. Zara noticed something strange. David was avoiding her. Calls went unanswered. When she visited his apartment, the security guard said he wasn't home. And then, one morning, she tried to withdraw money from one of her accounts. Declined. Her heart pounded. She tried another card. Declined. Panic rising, she rushed home, logged into her banking app, and gasped. All the accounts were empty. Her hands shook as she called David's number. Straight to voicemail. She sank onto the bed, her mind racing. No, this isn't happening. Then, as if the universe wanted to laugh in her face, her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered shakily. Hello? A deep chuckle came from the other end. Missing something, baby? Zara's stomach twisted. David, what have you done? David's voice was calm, amused. You really thought you were in control? That I loved you? He let out a low laugh. Oh, Zara. You were just my pawn. Tears burned in her eyes. You took everything? Everything. Her breathing turned ragged. I will find you, David. No, you won't. His tone darkened. Because the police will find you first. Zara's blood ran cold. What are you talking about? You killed Anthony, remember? Fear seized her chest. You helped me. David's voice turned cold. There's no proof of that. But there's plenty of proof that you did it. Before she could respond, there was a loud knock at the door. Police! Open up! Zara's world shattered. David had set her up. The officers stormed in, grabbing her before she could run. You are under arrest for the murder of Mr. Anthony Okafor, one of them declared, pulling her hands behind her back. She screamed, struggling. I didn't do it. I didn't. Then she saw him. Charles, Anthony's best friend, stood by the doorway, arms crossed, eyes filled with quiet satisfaction. Charles, please, she sobbed. You have to believe me. Charles shook his head. Believe you? I warned Anthony about you. And now he's dead. His voice hardened. You deserve this. The last thing she saw before being dragged away was Charles smiling. David thought he had won. But he was wrong. After spending weeks enjoying his stolen wealth, he was finally caught trying to flee the country. Police had traced all the missing money back to him. His betrayal of Zara had exposed him. And just like her, he was arrested. But the biggest twist? The government returned Anthony's wealth to his wife and son. In the end, the man Zara had helped destroy was the only one who won. The end.